Welcome to Purchase to Profits. I'm Seth Ferguson. Our guest today has been the host of Your Property Empire on Sky News Business Channel in Australia for over 10 years and was previously the property expert on Channel 9's My Home TV. He started buying property at the age of 22, semi-retired at the age of 31, and currently holds over 15 million of property in his personal portfolio. Chris Gray is the CEO of Empire. He buys homes and builds property portfolios for time-poor professionals, searching, negotiating, and renovating on their behalf. He travels overseas 10 to 15 times a year, educating others in how to buy and invest in property. Chris, welcome to Purchase to Profits. It's great to have you on the show.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this discussion. Most of our viewers are in North America. You are based in Australia. Do you mind telling the viewers who aren't familiar with you your background and what you're all about?
Yeah, sure. So basically grew up in the UK, was the son of a heart surgeon or heart physician. And so as he always used to say, son, I'm always a lot cleverer than you're ever going to be. And I basically thought I'm never going to work as hard as my dad, and so I've got to work a bit smarter, and I'm naturally pretty lazy, and so I always wanted to do a different kind of thing. So I basically got into property at the age of 22 and worked out that a 3-bedroom home was cheaper than a 1-bedroom home. And the reason that was effectively I could rent 2 rooms out to 2 friends and live for free, because the rents in the UK at the time, this is back in the 90s, was about 12%. So loads of my friends couldn't afford a 1-bedroom unit, and if you could, it'd be in the shittiest part of town, whereas a 3-bedroom house in the best part of town, right by the pubs and the restaurants, was more my kind of style. And I was lucky enough to buy a £100,000 place for 80,000. So I was only earning £10,000 at the time. So I basically made 2 years' salary overnight, lived for free because my tenants paid all the mortgage, and then worked out later on how to refinance, and I got a free Porsche. And so at the age of 24, I had a free house and a free Porsche, and I thought, hey, this is the way life should be. And I guess that was the inspiration to start on. And then I moved to Australia at 27 and just carried on building a portfolio over there.
Yeah, and plus you could stumble home from the bar and save the taxi.
Exactly. So literally you came out of the latest wine bar, full down the road, and literally within 5 minutes and you're back home.
Sounds pretty good. So what are your real estate goals? I know you got into it, to live for free. How has that morphed into your current real estate goals for investing?
Yeah, so look, I think the first part of real estate is building your portfolio up to a certain dollar level. And so my number, so when I retired or got out of work, then my number was about 3.5 million. But what I soon realized was that when you don't work, then you're spending 24/7. And you're hanging around other people that don't work, and so you need more money. So then my number moved to about 10 million. And I think it's really about getting to your number and then reducing the debt. So I haven't bought property for quite a few years. What I've been doing is trying to increase my equity in there. So my portfolio is around 15, 16 million. My debt's around 10. So I'm around 60, 65% geared. And the goal is to get down to about 50%, still gear up to 80, so then I've got a 30% buffer, and ideally that buffer is then say $5 or $6 million, and that's enough to cash flow me for the next 5 or 10 years, whether real estate goes up or whether I work or not. So my plan at the moment is purely about trying to secure my current position to make sure I'm never going to fall down.
For sure. So how did you come up with that $3.5 million initial goal? Because some people say, oh, I want to own a certain number of properties, a certain number of units. What pushed you towards that dollar volume instead of the number of properties?
Sure. And so lots of people talk about properties, but, and I'm sure it's the same in the US, is I buy properties in places like Bondi Beach, which a lot of people know. It's like a famous beach close to Sydney. And a 2-bedroom apartment there is $1.5 million. But you could still buy property in Australia for maybe 100, 200 grand. So I might say I've only got 1 property, and someone else might say I've got 7 or 10, but they've only got $1 million. And so a lot of this stuff is just people boasting and stuff like that. And there's books here, I bought 100 properties in a couple of years or something like that. But if they're not worth anything, it doesn't make any difference. It's all about dollar value. And someone can have one $10 million one, but that's not the ideal thing because the rents aren't too good on that. So it's all about building your own strategy. And a lot of what I've learned is I don't care what anyone else does. I work out what's right for me. And as long as I'm happy, as long as I'm not hurting anyone else, then who cares what the competition's doing in a way. So basically, when I was 31, I was working at Deloitte's. The market at the time was moving at about 20%. This is in early 2000s. So I was making about 600 grand a year. And it was really easy to pull that equity out in those days. Whereas at the same time at Deloitte's, I was earning $80,000 or 60 after tax. So I kind of took the Christmas break and thought, here I am working 40 hours a week for 60 grand, whereas I'm sitting on my backside earning 600 grand. Which option shall I take? I'll take the 600 grand. Now,
I'm sure that didn't take too long to figure out.
Exactly. And so, I mean, obviously the 20% growth wasn't going to happen forever. And that's when I realized, like, I need to secure the position for longer. But that was effectively it. So I didn't put a number on the 3.5 million initially. I just kept building it. I had 6 properties. And I just basically walked away from work after doing those numbers.
Okay. And you mentioned now you're in that debt reduction phase. At what point did you have a long-term plan for your portfolio saying, once I hit this certain threshold, I'll start reducing my debt? How did you know how to transition from the building to debt reduction?
Sure. And a fine line is that I'm not actually after debt reduction. I'm after LVR or loan to value reduction. So I'm not looking at paying off any of my debt. My thought long term is say I've got 15 million of property, 10 of debt. Ideally, if I can keep that 10 million of debt the same, I want 15 million to double to 30 million and that 30 to double to 60 million. Suddenly then I'm only 25% geared and it's almost irrelevant. And look, if I decide to sell properties to pay off the debt, then maybe. But the main thing was to get to a certain level. Because what I found out interviewing a lot of wealthy people is whether you're worth, say, 10, 20, 30, 50 million doesn't make any difference after a while. You still have the same home, same cars, same travel, all of that kind of stuff. And so it's if you really push things to the limits, that's when things go wrong. And so, look, I drive a Lamborghini. I've got a place that I rent overlooking the Harbour Bridge and Sydney Harbour. I've got a boat and all those kind of things. I travel 10 or 15 times a year and fly business class and stuff. But the next level would be then to have a $20 million home or have a private jet. And I know the increased satisfaction on that's going to be very, very tiny. So it's not worth me, I guess, pushing the limits to then have 30 or 40 million in property.
Yeah, no,
so
that makes sense.
That's the main journey that I've been learning is the incremental satisfaction diminishes when you buy bigger cars or bigger houses and stuff.
Yeah, makes sense. So do you do certain things maybe daily or weekly to help keep your real estate goals top of mind? Do you have any rituals?
Yeah, it's basically be so much in debt that you can't sleep and you've got no other choice. So it's what my philosophy isn't necessarily the philosophy I teach for other people to do, because hence the bald head, as I've had sleepless nights for a long time. Yeah. Literally just before this call, then I was doing my, 1st of January, I couldn't do it yesterday because I had a big hangover, but I know my rents come in on the 31st of December. And so I've got a spreadsheet to track my 15 properties and make sure the rent's being paid in. And then on the 18th, I know that the mortgages go out. So I'm just on top of my numbers. I know them really, really well. Because I know things can turn very, very quickly. If you get another few percent interest rate rise, property market drops, there's other expenses. So I'm just on top of my numbers because I need to be, because there's so much money involved. So I get about $500,000 in rent, so about, say, 40 or 50 grand a month coming in and probably 50 or 60 grand a month going out. So I just need to be on those numbers. And so I don't really necessarily have that many goals, which I know isn't the thing for an expert to be saying, but I say it like it is. I've just pushed to buy more and more property and then basically stop, and then my goal is just to hold it.
Yeah. And that's a good segue into your strategy for acquiring properties. You have quite a unique contrarian approach in acquiring properties when you were building up your portfolio. Would you mind sharing with the viewers how you addressed growing your portfolio?
Sure. So look, there's so many people around the world that reckon they can predict the property market, and I've been on Sky News for 10 years. I've done something like 400 or 500 shows, interviewed stacks of experts, and I think even the real experts, they don't reckon they can predict it. So most people want high capital growth, high rents, easy to find property, easy to borrow money from the bank, and the fifth one's gone out of my head, but it'll come back to me. And you never get all those 4 or 5 things all at the same time. And so my thought has always been is I buy when I've got the money to put down as a deposit, and I've got the money to cash flow it for the short to the medium term, and that's when I buy. So I bought in the global financial crisis, I bought in the booms, I bought in the busts. Half my portfolio I bought in the global financial crisis, so like 2008, 2009, when everyone was saying, don't buy, the market's not going to rise. And what I found is, so most of the properties that we buy in Australia are called negative geared. So basically, the rent doesn't cover all the expenses. So typically a property might cost you $10,000 or $20,000 a year to cash flow. So the argument always was why would you go and buy property in a down market when, especially in the good areas, you're not going to get it half price because there's always demand there. So you're not getting even 10 or 20% off. But why would you buy it if you've got to pay the holding costs kind of for the next few years? But my argument was even though I can't get property super cheap, at least I can get a property that ticks 10 out of the 10 boxes and I've got no competition for it. And sure, I might have to pay the minus 10 grand for a couple of years, but I still think the market's actually rising in the good areas. It's not hitting the newspapers because the average property price isn't rising, but median or average property prices I think are. And so then what we were happening on Sky News was we were telling all the public, buy now, buy now. It's the right time. Don't wait for the boom. You won't be able to pick it. And no one did. But then when they finally did move in, everyone moved in at the same time. And the market literally moved 10 or 20% overnight because someone goes to pay $1 million, they miss out, and then they pay $1 million and 10, $1 million and 20, and it keeps rising. And it's this big herd mentality, which I think is the same around the world. So suddenly, almost overnight, the properties that we're paying, say, 700 or 800 for then, suddenly went up to 800 or 900 overnight. And suddenly you weren't buying a 10 out of 10 property, you were buying a 7 or 8 out of 10. So that's why I'm always contrarian, and I buy just when I've got the cash. And one of my biggest contrarian things is I don't listen to the media. So I'm in the media. I do my own TV show for 10 years. I write for the newspapers, the magazines, for real estate agents, newsletters, and I don't read any of it. Ignore it.
That's good advice. And I think right now in Australia, you guys are experiencing something similar to what in Canada we're experiencing. We just had a peak of the market last spring, so spring 2017. Is that about correct with what's happening with you right now?
Yeah. So the major change for us is we've got a thing called APRA, which governs the 4 main banks over here. And for about 5 years, they've been worried about the property market bubble. And they always talk about the bubbles all around the world. And so what they tried and did is they couldn't put interest rates up because they thought that would put us into recession and the business economy isn't that great. So they couldn't change interest rates, which is the key driver for changing the market. So what they did was they started changing our serviceability. So basically they were saying to the banks, even though people are paying 4 or 5% interest rates, we want you to assess their serviceability at maybe 8 or 9% and principal and interest repayments rather than interest only. And for a while, it didn't really take effect. And then they really pushed hard with the banks, and then it did take effect. And then on top of that, about a year ago, we had a Royal Banking Commission. So this is, again, another independent body that reckoned that the banks were lending too much money. They were ripping people off. The funny stories were they were charging dead people. So people have passed away, and they're still charging them interest on loans or management fees and things like that. So the Banking Commission has just come in the last 6 or 12 months, and they've really put the screws down on things, saying you're lending too much money, it's not right. And also they're saying someone's someone's saying they're living off $1,000 a month, but they live in the best suburb in the country and they drive a Porsche or Ferrari or something. Their living expenses are really $3,000 or $4,000. So the biggest push now is we're struggling to borrow money, and there's lots of people that earn maybe a few $100,000 and they can't borrow a cent, and that's taken all the demand out of the property market.
Yeah, it's almost the exact same thing in Canada. In the United States, it's a little bit different, but the Toronto, Vancouver market here, same thing. The financing tap turned off, and we had about a 20% drop in values.
Yeah.
So with the investor hat on, it's time to buy. Are you feeling the same thing in Australia?
Yeah, so we don't think that most of the market, and first of all, there's not one market, and that's the thing that the media gets wrong all the time. So our biggest area that we were worried about the bubble was basically brand new apartment blocks where there's thousands of units in there. So basically with our foreign investor laws is foreigners can only buy brand new. They can't buy the second-hand properties, which protects our locals so that they're not getting the prices pushed up. So the people that buy a block of units in a massive tower in the middle of the CBD or the middle of the city, they're all the foreigners, or they're the people buying off the plan that are speculating. And these are the people that have hit biggest with the lending laws. So suddenly the speculators didn't have the equity or the income to settle the loans, and the foreigners didn't either. So some of those properties could be off 30 or 40%, and so that's a massive danger zone. So again, for any of your viewers or listeners listening, if you're buying into Australian markets, it's very, very hard buying secondhand because most of the time you've got to buy brand new. And the key is to get into small blocks, not where every apartment's the same. Because if someone drops their pants and sells it for half price or rents it for half price, every single property gets devalued there. So we're worried about that market. Some of the regional markets further out of town where people don't have high incomes, and if interest rates rise, then they can't afford the extra cost. And then people at the expensive end of town. If it's on the wrong side of the street, maybe it hasn't got parking. In the good times, it will sell, but in the bad times, it won't. But we think that if you stay away from the CBD, i.e. where there's all these high rises, and you go 5 to 15 Ks from the city, that means quite often we've got 3-story height limits, so you can't physically build any more property. It's the median or average price, so everyone can afford to rent it or buy it. We reckon that market's pretty solid. And maybe it's off a couple of percent. As long as you don't have to refinance or sell over the next year or two, shouldn't be any issue whatsoever. And you look back in 3 or 4 years' time and you won't even notice the blip. So for investors coming in is we're still saying still buy that stock. So even though you could feel like it would be great to buy something 40% undervalued, you never know where the bottom of that market is. And as soon as there's another turn in the market, that's going to be the first to go down. So our philosophy on investing is slow and steady wins the race. Buy blue chip, pay fair price, you know what you've got. Sure, it's not going to double in value, but it's not going to halve in value at the same time. And so that's why when we get all these changes in the market, and I've still got property in the UK, I don't worry too much because I know it's blue chip. I know I'm always going to have a tenant. The banks aren't going to worry that it's going to drop in value, and they're going to target someone else before they target me, hopefully.
Yeah, it always helps not to have a target on your back.
Yeah, but in a way, I've got a target, though, because once you've got a certain amount of debt, you're then a target because you're a big player. And I'm not a big player, but I'm kind of getting towards that level. So say if the bank had to, because what they had with APRA was the banks had to limit their lending to investors, I think, by 10% a year, or that they couldn't go over 10% growth a year. So rather than get back loans from 20 people at 500 grand each, it's a lot easier to get one of me at 10 million because no one's going to feel sorry for me if I go bust in the papers. Whereas if you get 20 old grannies that suddenly you've been kicked out of home, that's going to affect them. And so, yeah, it's easier to get the bigger fish.
Yeah, for sure. Do you want to share a deal that was a Keystone deal for you in your real estate investing career?
Yeah, look, probably the first one was that main one that I talked about before, was this one, the 3-bedroom unit being cheaper than the 1-bedroom apartment. So that was the real catalyst for getting started later on. But probably a bigger deal that's maybe a bit more exciting was a lot of the properties we try and buy over here are off-market or silent sales. So say you go to a Bondi Beach, which lots of people want to live in. It's a very sophisticated market. Everyone knows the price. then you're never going to get a bargain because the agents know what it's worth, so do the buyers. But in the global financial crisis, 2008, 2009, we found a block of units a few beaches down in a place called Coogee, and there was 2 properties up there for $750,000, which was kind of fair market value, a reasonable price. We then found out through another real estate agent that one of his developer clients owned another 3 in the building. And he'd been trying to add another level on there, but he'd spent 10 years, couldn't persuade all the other owners because they're all kind of old and decrepit and almost in retirement homes, so he couldn't do it. So we suddenly thought, well, these are 3 off-market deals, so if we buy these other 2, we can suddenly get 5 out of the 7 units with almost no one knowing. And so in the end, we went and did that, and we bought it for 5 clients and put them all into the market. But we only had 74% of the vote. And in order to develop in Australia, to basically get it through like a strata or the body corporate, you need 75% vote. So we were missing by 1%. So I then tried through some of the rental agents to say, look, there's one owner with two more properties. We'll offer you 600 each to 1.2 million. And they wouldn't come back. I then tried the strata managers. I was trying everyone to try and contact this owner, but I think he was in his 80s and wouldn't respond to anything. And then eventually the sales guy that sold us the first initial 2 came back to us and said, right, I managed to get you the final 2 sales, but the guy wants 1.1 million and he's not willing to budge. So we were begging to pay 1.2. We ended up getting them both for 1.1. Suddenly got 100% of the vote. So what I then did, and I bought one myself and then my father-in-law as well. And I said to everyone, right, we might be able to develop this block. So let's all put in $15,000. You paid 600 or 700 grand for your unit. It's worth putting in another 15 just to see if we can go through council to increase the size of the block. So with 7 of us, we had a 100 grand fund. I then spent 3 years trying to get it through council. And we basically got the council to agree to double it from 7 to 14 units. And we went kind of longer, fatter, wider. There was a bit of space at the back that we were going to put 4 car parks in. And the council said, no, why don't you actually build on it? So we bought a whole block of units in the back garden. And the real clincher on this was the cost to build or to develop it was another $3.5 million. So we had to pay 500 grand each, which none of us wanted to do. So I got a builder to agree to build it for us in return for some of the new units. So effectively, our unit block went from old to brand spanking new for effectively 0 cost for the owners. One of the units owned in there was 620. Now it's about 1.6 million or something like that, kind of 10 years later. And so, look, it was a really sexy deal. So we put it in magazines, like the before and after pictures are really, really cool. But still the danger of that, though, is I reckon those apartments would have gone from 600 to maybe 1.2, 1.3 by doing nothing. And even though we had a builder to go and do it and it cost us nothing to develop it and we made another 200 or 300 grand bonus, the risk is when he started building, if he'd gone bust or someone had fallen in the hole or someone had died and the council had shut it down, basically we were then risking all our money. And so even though it was super cool and a really good testimonial, it's really good for our clients, a lot of the time I actually say, well, in hindsight, even though it's really cool, I reckon just buying and holding, paint, recarpet, kitchen, bathroom, I reckon that's the way to go because effectively I could have risked my whole portfolio for someone falling in a hole. And so I know it's a bit defeatist and it's not the super cool story that, hey, that was a mega deal, we made lots of money. But sometimes when you own multiple properties, you start needing to get more cautious because you don't want one thing in your life suddenly ruining everything.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's at that point when you were doing that project, you already had your foundation portfolio established at that point.
Yeah, so I had a lot there. I ended up buying one of my other clients out. So I actually owned 3 of the properties in there. So I had about $2 million invested in there. But it's more that if everything went wrong, then suddenly the bank, I might have had other loans that were cross-collateralized with those current ones, and the bank would suddenly want everything.
Yeah.
And so look, we had some really good contracts, and effectively the builder would only get title to it once he had fully finished it. So he had to put the $3.5 million in cash. And so he had every incentive to do the right thing. He was going to pay our rent till the building was finished. So whether it took a year or 5 years didn't really make any difference. So getting the right legals and I guess contracts is really, really important. but still you could get those 1 in a million things and things can go wrong. So the main thing is just always look for a bit of caution out there at the same time.
For sure. So how has real estate changed your lifestyle? Because you went from working at Deloitte's to retiring at around 31. How's your life changed with real estate?
Oh, look, it's been unbelievable. So look, to give you I'll give you the worst to start with, and then we'll go to the best.
All right.
So look, when I was in my 20s, I worked full time. So I did a 9 to 5 or an 8 till 6 job. Then I commuted for an hour to go to London to study accounting at night, which I did 4 nights a week, Monday to Thursday. Girlfriend would stay over then on Friday night. I'd get up at about 8 in the morning on a Saturday, do a few hours studying, and then go back to bed, pretending that I hadn't really got up and the rest of it. So I was effectively working 6 or 7 days a week for about 5 years to get accounting qualifications and investing at the same time. And so, look, I still got to the pub, I still went out and had fun, but it was really working twice as hard in my 20s so that in my 30s and onwards I could then take life easy. I started seeing the rewards by about 24. I mentioned I refinanced, pulled the money out and bought a Porsche. So I had a free Porsche, free house. And even though I'd taken on more debt, even if I'd sold that first house, it would have paid the Porsche, paid the house off, and I'd still have money. So it still kind of worked. So I started seeing some of the benefits of that. And then when I traveled to Australia, I sold the Porsche. I had £10,000 in cash. And that allowed me to travel through half of Africa, through most of Asia, without having to work for 9 months and doing all of the bungee things, the whitewater rafting, where I traveled to Australia at 19 before and had no money. So I could then suddenly do all the things that the other travelers can do. And then really at 31, I got into Ferraris and Porsches and those kind of things. Managed to give up work at 31, which was unbelievable. So for 3 or 4 years, I literally did nothing. I just partied, boats, cars, started doing extras work just for fun, and that led me into a TV career. And so in the last 10 or 15 years, so I'm 47 now, so I've had life easy for about 16 years. I've just done some amazing things. It's been unbelievable, but there's still bad times in real estate. And we're kind of going through that at the moment. So it's not plain sailing. It's not as cool as all the books kind of portray things, or TV or Instagram and that kind of stuff. So there's still tough times, but I just know the extra benefits I can get compared to my employee friends that go out to work every day, that can't travel, haven't got the funds. I'm willing to still take that risk because I know the upside can be absolutely massive. And so, see, like with the travel, so I run my business on American Express. That gives me 1 or 2 million frequent flyer points. I've then got a guy that's an expert at frequent flyer points that books my flights. I only fly business or first, but we're actually flying to where we're going to Florida Keys in about 5 or 6 days for a family wedding. But trying to get frequent flyer points to the US is seriously hard. And I've got my 2 kids with me, so we're flying economy. So I'm still willing to suffer at the same time just to teach my kids the value of money.
Yeah, and that's important. So you said you're 47. How old are your kids now?
So kids are 9 and 10.
Are you starting to teach them the real estate game?
I'm trying to. They don't really understand it. So I live in a place called Darling Point or Double Bay. So it's a pretty exclusive suburb in Sydney, and I'm trying to teach them the value of money. But since they've been at kindergarten, they've gone to school by Ferrari, Lamborghini. I've got a stretch limousine, Cadillac rally car now, and I'm into the American cars now. I've also got a 1912 Ford Model T. And so the guys are going to school in these super swanky cars. Trying to teach them the value of money is pretty hard. And still, when they ask, what do your parents do? They say, oh, mummy works for a living, daddy watches TV and drinks beer. And so my wife said, look, you really need to get a job to show the kids like that you work for a living and it's not just mummy that does all the work. And I said, look, surely, and she's a communications expert, surely you can talk about it with them rather than me have to get a job for 10 or 20 years to prove a point. Surely you can explain it slightly better to say, well, daddy's invested really hard. He kind of leverages his time so he doesn't have to put the hours in of the other parents, but he's got mental stress rather than physical stress. And yeah, if you want to sit around and drink beer for the rest of your life and go on the boats like your dad, then you need to get smarter. I don't know how that's going there.
Well, maybe we'll have you back on in a couple of years, and you can give us an update.
Yeah, but actually, on a truthful thing around this, so I go to a lot of ultra high net worth conferences where the kind of the billionaires and their advisors go, and the biggest issue that these guys talk about, and quite often we get a lot of international experts coming in and a lot of guys from the US. The big thing that these guys worry about is teaching kids the value of money, trying to get them not to be spoiled brats, not to sniff it all up their nose and do all those kind of things. And some of the kids come on the conferences as well, and they talk to us about their backgrounds. And a lot of them have got charities that they work for, like the family charity. And that is the biggest problem of the wealthy, or one of the biggest problems, is how to teach your kids not to be spoiled brats. And what I've picked up from these conferences is still no one knows what the answer is. So that's a tough thing.
Yeah, no, for sure. But you're keeping yourself busy now. You run Empire, which is a buyer agency.
Yeah, so I've got a business called Your Empire. Basically, when I was 31 and at Deloitte, then a lot of people realized I was doing things differently. So I tried to salary sacrifice a convertible 355 Ferrari at work. And they worked out that the fringe benefits tax on it was double my wages. So they knew that I wasn't buying it through my wages. So I got a reputation at Deloitte, and I was really, really junior at Deloitte because I only earned 80 grand, that I was doing something differently. So I was doing the holidays, had boats and had cars, and turning up to work and not really caring. So people asked me how I did it. So I just started teaching them for free how to go and do it. Then I started running courses, and people were paying me how to do it. And then people basically said, look, rather than you teach me, can you just do it all for me? And I'd rather pay you a fee to do that.
No, that's and so right now you have are you just right in Sydney, or do you kind of go all over the place?
Yeah, so with my teaching, I can kind of teach people anywhere in the world because most of the philosophies are pretty much the same. And so we do some online courses to teach people as well. But basically the buying, we do it in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. So that's where we do it for them. Or we can teach them how to do it anywhere else. Because virtually everything's a mindset. Sure, different countries have got different taxes and things like that. But most of it is teaching people to outsource things. Yeah. So the reason I'm very time rich is I'm very good at outsourcing. So even though I'm a qualified accountant, mortgage broker, I get other people to do it. And so it's almost like the CEO. The CEO makes the money because he makes the decisions. And so just like he has a sales department, a marketing department, accounting, effectively as a property investor, I have all my experts around me.
Yeah. So where can people find more about you? I know you have a book and you just launched last year a real estate investing course. Where can people get some more information?
Yeah, sure. So if they just go to yourempire.com.au or just Google Chris Gray, Gray, it's pretty much all on the website. So with the book, I've done quite a few books, but the main one on there is called The Effortless Empire. And that really teaches people how to build a $5, $10, $20 million portfolio. And I guess all of the things I've done to kind of retire and to take life pretty easy. The book's completely free, so you can get the PDF online. You can get it on iTunes as the audiobook. So if you haven't got time or if you can't read, then just listen to the iTunes one. And if you want a physical copy, then I think for $5, then we'll send you a physical book as well.
Okay. No, that sounds good. So, Chris, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your success story with us. I really enjoyed it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. And to our viewers, I wish you well on your journey from purchase to profits. See you next time.